I remember the exact taste of that morning. Cold vending machine coffee and a plastic-wrapped ham sandwich. The last breakfast I would ever eat at the Portland Women's Shelter. 18 years old. That was the age the system told you good luck. You are on your own now. No more social workers checking in. No more group homes with rotating house parents. No more pretending that somewhere, somehow, a family might still want you. My brother Callum stood beside me on the sidewalk, his backpack hanging off one shoulder. 16 years old, still technically in the system, but he had made it clear to every caseworker, every foster parent, every judge who would listen. Where Ren goes, I go. That was the one constant in my life. Through 6 foster homes, 4 group placements, and more temporary shelters than I could count, Callum and I had stayed together. Social workers had tried to separate us twice. Both times we had made ourselves so difficult that they gave up. We fought. We ran. We did whatever it took. Because in a world where nothing lasted, we were the only permanent thing each other had. And so here we were. 2 kids with everything we owned stuffed into faded backpacks. $93 between us. A shelter address we could use for mail. And absolutely nothing else. The shelter manager, a tired woman named Deborah, who had seen 1,000 kids just like us pass through her doors, came outside with an envelope in her hand. Her face had that look I had learned to recognize over the years. The look adults got when they had news they did not know how to deliver. "This came for you," she said. "Certified mail. Had to sign for it." I looked at the envelope. Heavy cream paper, the kind rich people used. In the upper left corner, a return address from some place called Ridgecrest, Montana. And beneath that, a name I did not recognize. Theodora Vance, attorney at law. "Who do you know in Montana?" Callum asked. "Nobody." I tore it open right there on the sidewalk. The letter inside was typed on the same expensive paper. And as I read the words, the coffee in my stomach turned to ice. "Dear Miss Mercer and Mr. Mercer, it is my duty to inform you that Daniel and Helen Mercer, your biological parents, have been declared legally deceased as of 6 months prior to this correspondence. As their surviving children and sole heirs, you are required to attend the reading of their last will and testament. The reading will take place at the offices of Ashford Holdings in Ridgecrest, Montana. Enclosed, please find 2 bus tickets for travel. Your presence is mandatory for the release of your inheritance. Sincerely, Theodora Vance." I read it twice, then a third time. The words did not change. "Our parents," Callum said quietly. He had read over my shoulder. "They're dead. They've been dead to us for 14 years. That's not the same thing." He was right. It was not the same thing at all. For 14 years, I had believed the story everyone told me. Your parents were addicts. Your parents were homeless. Your parents abandoned you at a fire station when you were 4 years old and your brother was 2, and they never looked back. The file said our mother had struggled with substances. The file said our father had mental health issues that made him unstable. The file said they had walked away from 2 children who were too young to understand, and that was that. I had built my entire life around that story. Every time a foster placement fell through, every time a potential adoptive family decided we were too much trouble, every time I lay awake at night wondering what was so wrong with me that my own parents could not be bothered to stay. The story explained everything. Your parents did not want you. Nobody has ever wanted you. Get used to it. But now there was a letter, and the letter said inheritance. And the letter said Ashford Holdings, which even I knew was one of the biggest real estate companies in the Pacific Northwest. Their signs were on half the commercial buildings in downtown Portland. I looked at Callum. His face was doing that thing it did when he was trying not to feel something. Jaw tight, eyes distant, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Cal," I said softly, "don't." He shook his head. "Not yet. I can't talk about it yet." So we did not talk about it. We walked to the Greyhound station in silence. bought nothing because we could not afford to waste a penny, and sat on a metal bench waiting for a bus that would take us to a place we had never been, to collect an inheritance from parents we had spent our whole lives trying to forget. The bus ride to Montana took 19 hours, through the Columbia River Gorge, past wheat fields that stretched to the horizon, up into mountains that made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in my life. Callum slept most of the way. He always could sleep anywhere. It was a survival skill you learned in foster care. Take rest when you can, because you never know when the next placement will have you sharing a room with 6 other kids and sleeping becomes impossible. I could not sleep. I kept turning the letter over in my hands, reading and rereading the words until they lost all meaning. Daniel and Helen Mercer. Those names had been ghosts my entire life. Phantoms I tried not to think about. And now suddenly they were real. They had worked for a real company. They had lived in a real place. They had died real deaths. And apparently they had left us something. The questions multiplied in my mind like rabbits. Why had they left us? Why had they never come back? Why had they worked for a company like Ashford Holdings if they were supposedly homeless addicts? And why, after 14 years of silence, had they left us anything at all? I watched the landscape change outside the window. Oregon gave way to Washington. Washington gave way to Idaho. The cities thinned out, replaced by small towns and endless stretches of farmland. And then finally Montana. The mountains here were different, bigger, wilder. They rose up from the earth like ancient giants, their peaks still white with snow even though it was late spring. I had never seen anything like them. Growing up in Portland, surrounded by concrete and foster homes and the constant noise of a city that never stopped moving, I had forgotten that places like this existed. The bus pulled into Ridgecrest just after dawn. It was exactly the kind of small Montana town I had seen in movies, but never believed actually existed. Main Street with a hardware store and a diner with red vinyl booths visible through the window. A white Methodist church with a steeple that caught the morning light. Mountains rising up on every side like walls protecting the valley from the outside world. Population 3,500, according to the sign. I had lived in foster homes with more people than that. Callum stirred beside me, blinking awake as the bus lurched to a stop. "We're here," he asked. "We're here." He pressed his face to the window, taking in the town. It's small. Very small. Do you think they have a Starbucks? I think they have a gas station that might sell coffee. He almost smiled. Almost. A woman was waiting at the bus station. She was in her mid-50s, dressed in a simple gray suit, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. She held a sign that said, Mercer. "I'm Theodora Vance," she said as we approached. Her handshake was firm but warm. "I'm the one who sent the letter." "Where's our inheritance, Ron?" I asked. I had not meant to be so blunt, but I was exhausted and hungry, and my patience had run out somewhere around the Idaho border. Theodora Vance smiled, but there was something sad in it, something that told me she knew more than she was saying. "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple. The will reading is at the Ashford estate. I'll drive you there now." "Why is it at their estate? You said our parents worked for them." "Your parents worked for Ashford Holdings for 12 years. When they left, some of their affairs became entangled with the company. Mr. Ashford insisted the reading take place at his home." "Mr. Ashford?" "Gideon Ashford, the founder and chairman." She paused, weighing her next words carefully. "I should warn you, he's not a particularly warm man." That turned out to be the understatement of the century. The drive to the Ashford estate took us out of town, up a winding mountain road lined with pine trees so tall they blocked out the sky. Theodora drove in silence, occasionally glancing at us in the rearview mirror, with an expression I could not quite read. Finally, we turned onto a private road. Iron gates stood at the entrance, the kind that belonged on a castle rather than a house. Beyond them, a gravel drive curved through manicured lawns before arriving at the house itself. House was the wrong word. Mansion, estate, fortress. The building was massive, 3 stories of stone and timber, with windows that reflected the morning sun like dozens of watching eyes. A fountain sat in the circular drive, water cascading over marble figures that looked like they belonged in a museum. Callum had gone quiet. He always went quiet when he was scared. It's just a house, I told him. It's not just a house. It's the kind of house where bad things happen. I wanted to tell him he was being dramatic, but as we drove through those iron gates, I felt it too. Something cold settling into my bones. A warning I could not quite name. Theodora led us through a marble foyer, down a hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men, who all seemed to be looking down at us with disapproval, and into a wood-paneled study where 2 people were already waiting. The first was an old man in a wheelchair. 72 years old, I would later learn. His face was a map of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and dark and completely without warmth. He wore a suit that probably cost more than every piece of clothing I had ever owned combined. His hands rested on the arms of his wheelchair like a king waiting for subjects to approach his throne. The second was younger, early 30s. He had his father's dark eyes, but where the old man was still and watchful, this one radiated a kind of casual cruelty, like a cat who had cornered a mouse and was deciding whether to play with it first. "So these are the Mercer children," the old man said. His voice was like gravel scraping across stone. I expected more. "We didn't expect anything," I said. "We just want to know what our parents left us." The old man's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. It did not reach his eyes. "Straight to business. I respect that. Have a seat." We sat. The chairs were leather, expensive, uncomfortable, designed to make visitors feel small. Theodora took her place at a small desk and opened a leather folder. "Before we begin," the younger man said, "I should introduce myself. Sterling Ashford. My father and I worked closely with your parents for many years." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. And then suddenly I remembered. The memory came flooding back like water through a broken dam. A winter night, 14 years ago. I was 4 years old and Callum was 2, and we were at this very house for some kind of company party. Our parents had brought us because they could not find a babysitter. I remembered the grand rooms filled with adults in fancy clothes, the boredom of being a child at a grown-up party, the way Callum had fussed and cried until I took him away to find somewhere quiet. And this man, this Sterling Ashford. He had been 18 then, home from his first year of college. He had found us wandering the halls, bored and looking for something to do. "Want to play a game?" he had asked, smiling that same smile he was smiling now. He had taken us to a storage shed behind the main house. He had locked us inside, and he had left us there all night in the freezing cold, while our parents searched frantically and the Montana winter tried to kill us. I remembered the cold, the way it had seeped into my bones, making my teeth chatter so hard I thought they would break. I remembered holding Callum in my arms, his tiny body shivering against mine, his cries growing weaker as the hours passed. I remembered singing songs I barely knew, making up words when I forgot them, doing anything to keep him calm. I remembered promising him someone would come, someone would find us. They found us the next morning. I had hypothermia. Callum had frostbite on 3 toes. And the day after that, our parents disappeared. "I remember you," I said quietly. Sterling's smile flickered, just for a moment. "Do you?" The shed, the cold. My brother almost lost his toes. Children have such vivid imaginations. It was an imagination. The room went very still. Gideon Ashford was watching me with new interest now, like I had suddenly become a puzzle he needed to solve. "Perhaps," Theodora said carefully, her voice cutting through the tension, "we should proceed with the reading." The will was short, brutally short. "To our children, Wren and Callum Mercer, we leave the following. The Mercer family homestead, consisting of 85 acres of land and all structures thereon, located in unincorporated Garfield County, Montana. A safe deposit box at First Mountain Bank in Ridgecrest, Montana, to be opened only by both heirs together, and a map, coordinates marked, leading to what we could not take with us but could not bear to destroy. May you find what we never could. With all our love, Daniel and Helen Mercer. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no reason for why they had abandoned us, or where they had been for 14 years, or why they had suddenly turned up dead. Just a rundown farm, a mysterious box, and a map to somewhere. 85 acres of worthless scrubland, Sterling said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. And a farmhouse that hasn't been occupied in 14 years. Some inheritance. If it's worthless, Callum said quietly, why do you care? Sterling's eyes narrowed. Excuse me, you said it's worthless. So why are you here? Why did your father insist the reading happen at your house? Why do you care what two foster kids inherited from their dead parents? For the first time since we arrived, Sterling looked uncertain. He glanced at his father. Gideon Ashford steepled his fingers. My son is right. The land is worthless. But I'm a businessman, and I hate loose ends. So I'll make you an offer. $50,000 right now in exchange for signing over all rights to the property. $50,000, more money than I had ever seen in my life. More money than I could even imagine. Why? I asked. Because I want this matter closed. Your parents caused considerable disruption when they left my company. I'd prefer not to have their children poking around, stirring up old memories. What kind of disruption? That's not your concern. Our parents are dead. Everything about them is our concern. Gideon's eyes went cold. 50,000. Final offer. Take it or leave it. I looked at Callum. He gave me the slightest shake of his head. We'll take the farm, I said. If you have been listening this far, I want to ask you something. If someone offered you $50,000 to walk away from the only thing your parents ever left you, a clue to a mystery you have been trying to solve your whole life, would you take the money, or would you need to know the truth? Let me know in the comments, because for me the answer was simple. Some things matter more than money, and the truth about my parents was one of them. Theodora drove us to the farm herself. The road wound through valleys and over ridges, past cattle ranches and wheat fields, until finally we turned onto a dirt track that had not seen maintenance in years. The SUV bounced over ruts and potholes, jostling us in our seats. Outside the windows, the landscape transformed from cultivated farmland to something wilder. Overgrown pastures dotted with wildflowers, stands of pine trees that had never been thinned, a creek that crossed the road, forcing Theodora to drive slowly through the shallow water. Your grandparents, Margaret and Thomas Mercer, built this place in 1952, Theodora said as we bounced along. Your mother grew up here. She used to tell me stories about riding horses through these hills, swimming in the creek during summer, watching the stars from the roof of the barn. You knew our mother? I was her attorney and her friend. She paused, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. I tried to find you children after your parents left, but the foster system is complicated. By the time I tracked you down, you had moved 3 times, then 4 times. Then I lost the trail entirely. You could have tried harder. Yes. Her voice was heavy with something that might have been guilt. I could have. The farmhouse appeared around a bend in the road, and despite everything, my breath caught in my throat. It was exactly the kind of house I had dreamed about as a child. 2 stories, white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch with a swing. A red barn stood behind it, and beyond that, hills rolled away toward distant mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged on one side. Weeds had conquered what must have once been a garden, and the grass in the front yard was knee-high. But underneath the neglect, I could see something solid, something that had been built to last. Like whoever had put these walls together had known they would need to weather storms for generations. Home, Callum said softly. It's not our home. It's just a house. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Something about this place called to me, something that felt older than memory. We spent the first night sleeping on the floor of the living room, wrapped in blankets Theodora had brought from her car. The electricity had been shut off years ago, and the plumbing was questionable at best. But the roof did not leak, and the walls kept out the wind. And after 19 hours on a bus, in a day of having my entire understanding of my life turned upside down, that was enough. Callum fell asleep quickly. He always could sleep anywhere. It was a survival skill you learned in foster care. Take rest when you can, because you never know when the next placement will have you sharing a room with 6 other kids. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the map. It was hand-drawn on paper that felt old and delicate. The coordinates pointed to somewhere in the Bitterroot Mountains, about 3 miles from the farmhouse. And in the margin, in handwriting I somehow knew was my mother's, 4 words: find what we left. What had they left? And why could they not take it with them? And why could they not bear to destroy it? The questions circled in my head like restless birds, round and round, until sleep finally took me. The next morning we walked to town. It was only 2 miles, but the road was all uphill, and by the time we reached Main Street, my legs were burning. Callum seemed fine. At 16, he still had that teenage ability to absorb physical hardship like it was nothing. The diner was called Rosie's, and it looked like it had not changed since 1975. Formica tables, a long counter with red vinyl stools, the smell of coffee and bacon grease thick in the air. A bell jingled over the door as we walked in, and every head in the place turned to look at us. We had enough money for one breakfast to split between us. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag that said Jolene, took one look at us and brought out 2 full plates. "On the house," she said. "You're the Mercer kids, aren't you?" I nodded, surprised. "Your grandmother used to bring your mother here every Saturday morning. Pancakes with extra whipped cream." She smiled at the memory. "We've been wondering when someone would finally come back to the old place. You knew our family. Everyone in Ridgecrest knew the Mercers. Good people, hard workers. Real shame. What happened?" "What did happen?" Her smile faded. "That's not really my story to tell. But if you want to know, you should talk to Gil Harlow. He runs the gas station out on Route 7. He and your father were close." Gil Harlow turned out to be a grizzled man in his mid-60s, with a gray beard and hands that looked like they had done hard work every day of his life. His gas station was small, just 2 pumps and a convenience store that sold everything from motor oil to homemade beef jerky. When he saw us walk in, he stopped what he was doing and stared. "I'll be damned," he said. "Danny's kids. You knew our father?" "Knew him. I was his best friend for 20 years. We grew up together, right here in Ridgecrest, went to school together, worked our first jobs together, stood up at each other's weddings." His voice cracked. "I've been waiting 14 years for someone to come asking questions." He closed the gas station early and drove us back to the farm in his old pickup truck. Along the way he talked, and what he told us changed everything. "Your parents weren't addicts," Gil said, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was holding on to something he had been carrying for far too long. "That was a lie, a story someone planted in the foster system files. Your father was the sharpest man I ever knew. Graduated top of his class, got a job as an accountant at Ashford Holdings right out of college. Your mother followed him. They were both brilliant with numbers. Then why did they leave us?" Gil was quiet for a long moment. His knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "They didn't leave you. They were forced out." The story came out in pieces like he had been carrying it so long he had forgotten how to tell it straight. Our parents had discovered something: irregularities in Ashford Holdings books, money flowing through shell companies, disappearing into offshore accounts, reappearing in ways that did not add up. They had started digging, carefully at first, then with growing urgency as they realized the scope of what they had found. Gideon Ashford was not just running a real estate company. He was running a criminal enterprise, tax fraud, money laundering, and worst of all, a decades-long scheme to steal land from small farmers across Montana, using legal tricks and outright forgery to transfer deeds into Ashford Holdings' name. Your parents had proof, Gil said, enough to put Gideon away for life. They were going to take it to the FBI. What happened? Sterling happened. That night at the Christmas party, he didn't lock you in that shed by accident. It was a message. They said if your parents talked, the next time they wouldn't find you alive. My stomach dropped. They threatened to kill us? They threatened to kill you, so your parents ran, disappeared in the middle of the night, left you at a fire station where they knew you'd be found and taken care of. But we weren't taken care of. We spent 14 years in foster care. I know, Gil's voice broke. I know, and I'm so sorry. I tried to find you. I tried to tell the authorities what really happened. But Ashford has people everywhere. The sheriff at the time was on his payroll. The judge who handled your custody case was his golf buddy. Every door I knocked on got slammed in my face. Eventually, they made it clear that if I didn't stop asking questions, I'd end up like your parents. How did they end up? Gil was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the truck's engine and the gravel crunching under the tires. 6 months ago, there was a car accident. Single vehicle, off a mountain road. They said your father lost control, went over the edge. Both killed instantly. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. But I don't believe it was an accident. I think Ashford finally found them. And I think he finished what he started 14 years ago. We sat in silence as the farmhouse came into view. My whole body felt numb. The map, Callum said quietly. In the will, they left us a map. Gil looked at him sharply. A map to where? Somewhere in the Bitterroots. Coordinates. Do you still have it? I pulled the worn paper from my pocket. Gil studied it for a long moment, then let out a breath. I know this area. There's an old mine shaft up there, abandoned since the 1920s. Your father used to go up there to hunt. He paused. But there's something else. A few years before they disappeared, your parents bought a generator and a whole lot of supplies. I helped your father haul them up the mountain. He said it was for a hunting cabin, but there was no hunting cabin. What was there? I don't know. He never let me see. But whatever your parents were hiding, I think it's up there. And I think that's what Ashford wants. Has anyone ever told you a truth that made you rethink everything you believed about yourself? A moment when the story you had carried your whole life suddenly fell apart? If so, I would love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. Because that moment in Gil's truck, looking at the farmhouse my mother grew up in, that was the moment I stopped being the girl whose parents did not want her and became the girl whose parents died trying to protect her. We hiked into the mountains the next morning. Gil wanted to come with us, but his knees were not what they used to be, and the trail was steep. Instead, he gave us supplies, showed us how to read the coordinates on the map, and made us promise to be careful. Ashford has eyes everywhere, he warned. If he finds out what you're looking for, he'll send people. Bad people. We'll be careful. The hike took 3 hours. Through pine forests that smelled like Christmas morning, across streams so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom, up switchbacks that made my lungs burn and my legs scream. The higher we climbed, the quieter the world became. No cars, no voices, just the wind in the trees and the crunch of our boots on the trail. But finally we reached the coordinates. There was no hunting cabin. There was no visible mine shaft. There was nothing but a rocky hillside covered in scrub brush. This can't be right, Callum said, checking the map for the 10th time. This is exactly where it says to go. I walked slowly across the hillside, looking for anything out of place. A door, a hatch, something. And then I saw it. A small opening in the rock, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Natural looking, like just another crack in the mountainside. But when I brushed away the brush covering it, I found metal. A door. Steel, painted to look like stone. Hidden so perfectly that you could walk right past it 100 times and never know it was there. Callum, I breathed, get over here. The door had two keyholes, two separate locks. And suddenly I understood why the will had insisted we both be present to open the safe deposit box. We had picked it up that morning before the hike. Inside were two iron keys, old and heavy, with no explanation attached. Callum and I looked at each other. Together, he said, we each took a key. We each inserted it into a lock. We turned them at the same time. There was a deep mechanical click, like something ancient waking up after a long sleep. And then the door swung open. The first thing I noticed was the warmth. Outside, the mountain air was crisp and cold, but inside it was like stepping into a heated house. A corridor stretched before us, smooth concrete walls lined with soft lighting that had flickered on automatically when we entered. Doorways branched off on either side, leading to rooms I could not yet see. And somewhere in the depths of the mountain, I could hear the steady hum of machinery, generators, water systems, life support for a place built to sustain people for years. This was not a cave. This was not an abandoned mine shaft. This was something else entirely. Callum walked beside me, his eyes wide. What is this place? I could not answer. I was too busy staring at the photographs. They covered one entire wall of the first room we entered. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Pinned to corkboard, taped to the concrete, arranged in a careful timeline that stretched back over a decade. And every single one was of us. A photo of me at 6 years old, walking into my second foster home, my face a mask of false bravery. Callum at 8, riding a borrowed bike in a stranger's driveway, grinning like he had won the lottery. My 7th grade award ceremony, holding a certificate I had forgotten I ever received. Callum at 14, hunched over a library computer, building something from nothing the way he always did. Every year, every placement, every school photo and birthday party and ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Someone had been watching us. Someone had been documenting our lives. Someone had been there, invisible, capturing moments we never knew anyone cared about. Beneath each photo, handwriting I was beginning to recognize. Ren, age 10, still fighting. Callum, age 9, loves puzzles just like his father. Ren, first job, so proud. Callum building his first computer, the genius I always knew he was. My knees gave out. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. They had not forgotten us. They had not abandoned us. They had been there, watching, loving us from a distance they could not close. Ren, Callum's voice was shaking. There's something else. He had found a desk in the corner of the room. On it sat an envelope, a cassette recorder, and a single tape. The envelope had my name on it, and beneath that, 4 words. Open when you are ready. I was not ready. I would never be ready. But I opened it anyway. Dear Ren, if you are reading this, then our worst fears have come true. We are gone, and you and Callum are finally here, in the place we built to keep you safe. I need you to understand something, baby girl. Something I should have been able to tell you in person every single day of your life. We never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second, not for 1 breath. The night we left you at that fire station was the worst night of our lives. I cried for 6 months straight. Your father barely spoke for a year. But we did not have a choice. The Ashfords were going to kill you, not threaten, not intimidate, kill. Sterling made that very clear when he locked you in that shed. If we talked, if we went to the authorities, if we did anything except disappear, they would find you, and they would hurt you in ways no parent should ever have to imagine. So we ran. We spent 14 years in hiding, moving from place to place, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to be found. And every single day we watched you. We had people who helped us, people who sent us photos, updates, report cards, everything we could get. We never stopped being your parents. We just had to love you from far away. But we did not stop fighting either. Your father kept digging. Even in hiding, he never gave up on bringing Ashford down. He built this place as a refuge, a bunker where we could store everything we gathered. Evidence, documents, proof of every crime the Ashford family has committed in the last 40 years. It is all here, in this bunker, enough to destroy them completely. We were going to come back for you. When we had enough evidence, when we knew you would be safe, we were going to finish what we started and come back to be a family again. But something happened. I do not know what as I write this, but if you are reading this letter, it means they found us first. So now the choice is yours. You can destroy everything in this bunker. Walk away. Live a quiet life somewhere far from here. The Ashfords will never know what you found. You can be free of them forever, or you can finish what we started. All the evidence is on the hard drives in the storage room. Names, dates, transactions, witness statements. Everything the FBI would need to put Gideon and Sterling Ashford away for the rest of their lives. It is dangerous. If they find out you have this, they will come for you. They will do anything to make sure you never talk. But if you do talk, if you are brave enough to finish what we could not, you will not just be avenging us. You will be saving every other family they have ever hurt, every farmer they have cheated, every life they have destroyed. Whatever you decide, know this. I am so proud of the woman you have become. I have watched you grow from a scared little girl into a fierce, strong, beautiful person. You have survived things that would have broken most people. And you did it while protecting your brother, just like I always knew you would. You are my daughter, and I have loved you every single day since the moment you were born. Forever, Mom. I do not know how long I sat there, holding that letter. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. The words blurred and swam through my tears until I had to set it down, afraid I would destroy it. Callum was crying too. Silent tears, the way he always cried. He had found the cassette player and was holding it in his hands like it was made of glass. Should we play it? He asked. I nodded. He pressed play, and our mother's voice filled the room. Hey, babies. Her voice was older than I remembered, rougher, tired, but underneath it was a warmth that reached across the years and wrapped around us like a blanket. I'm guessing you have a lot of questions, and you deserve answers. She told us everything, the whole story, from the beginning, how she and our father had met at Ashford Holdings, how they had slowly realized what kind of man Gideon Ashford really was, how they had started collecting evidence, carefully at first, then with growing desperation as they understood the scope of his crimes. She told us about the night Sterling locked us in the shed, how our father had wanted to kill him with his bare hands, and how she had talked him down. How they had realized in that moment that they could never fight the Ashfords head-on, not without losing us. She told us about the bunker, how they had spent 3 years building it, piece by piece, using cash and fake names, and help from a handful of people they trusted absolutely. How it had become their mission, their obsession, their only way of staying connected to the children they had been forced to leave behind. And then her voice broke. I know we hurt you, she said. I know you spent 14 years thinking we didn't want you, and I'm so sorry. If I could take back the pain you felt, I would give anything, everything, my own life, 100 times over. She paused. In the background, I could hear a man's voice murmuring something. Our father, I realized. But I need you to know something, she continued. Something I should have found a way to tell you, even from a distance. Something I wrote on every photograph, every note, every piece of this bunker I helped build. Another pause. You were always loved, Wren. You were always loved, Callum. Even when we couldn't be there, even when it felt like you were alone. You were never alone. Not really. We were with you every single day, watching, hoping, loving you with everything we had. And now it's your turn to decide what happens next. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I had ever felt. Before I tell you what we decided, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to make a choice that could change everything? Not just for yourself, but for other people? For strangers you have never met? Have you ever held that kind of power in your hands and felt the weight of it pressing down on you? I would love to hear your story. Leave it in the comments below. And if you want to know what we did with what our parents left us, stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. We spent 3 days in that bunker, 3 days reading documents, 3 days watching videos, 3 days going through file after file of evidence that painted a picture so damning it made my head spin. Gideon Ashford had not just committed crimes, he had built an empire on them. For 40 years, he had been systematically cheating small farmers out of their land, forging documents, bribing officials, filing fraudulent lawsuits. By the time his victims realized what was happening, it was too late. The land was gone, the deeds were transferred, and Ashford Holdings had grown a little bigger. 200 families. That was the number we found in the files. 200 families who had lost everything because of one man's greed. But that was not all. There was tax fraud stretching back decades, money laundering through shell companies in 6 different countries, bribes paid to judges, sheriffs, state legislators. A network of corruption so vast and so deep that it seemed impossible anyone could bring it down. Our parents had tried. They had spent 14 years gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for the day when they could finally take it public. And then they had died in a car accident that was almost certainly not an accident at all. We have to do something, Callum said on the 3rd day. He had barely slept. Neither of us had. We can't just sit on this. I know. Then what do we do? I looked at the wall of photographs. Our entire lives documented by people who loved us, people who had sacrificed everything to keep us safe. We finished what they started. The first person I called was Theodora Vance. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I always suspected, she finally said. Your parents hinted at what they were doing before they disappeared, but I never knew the extent. Another pause. Do you understand what you're risking? If Ashford finds out what you have, he won't stop at threats. Not this time. I know. And you still want to move forward? I thought about my mother's letter, about the tape, about 14 years of thinking I was unwanted, unloved, forgotten. My parents died for this, I said. I'm not going to let that be for nothing. Theodora was quiet for a moment. Then, there's something you should know. I've been working with the FBI for 5 years, building a case against Ashford piece by piece. But I never had enough evidence. The witnesses were too scared to talk. The documents were too well hidden. Her voice strengthened. But what you're describing, if you really have what you say you have, this could be it. Come to the bunker. See for yourself. She came that afternoon, hiking up the mountain with a determination that belied her 56 years. And when she saw what our parents had built, she started to cry. They did it, she whispered. They actually did it. This is enough. This is more than enough. Word spread faster than I expected. Within a week, the farmhouse had become a gathering place. Families from all over Montana, people who had lost their land to Ashford Holdings, showed up at our door. Some were angry, Some were grieving. All of them wanted justice. Pastor Emmett Sable and his wife Lorraine became our unofficial hosts. They had been friends of my grandparents, they told us. They had watched my mother grow up, had celebrated when she married my father, had wept when they disappeared. We never stopped believing they would come back, Lorraine said, pressing a warm casserole into my hands. And now here you are, their children, their legacy. Gil Harlow became our unofficial security chief. He might have been 64 with bad knees, but he still knew how to handle a rifle, and he had connections with every farmer and rancher in a 50-mile radius. His son Boone, 20 years old and just back from a stint in the Army, took charge of the technical work. He and Callum spent hours in the bunker, copying files, encrypting backups, setting up secure channels to send information to federal investigators. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever felt completely alone, only to discover that people you did not even know were ready to stand beside you? That is what those weeks felt like. Strangers becoming neighbors, neighbors becoming family. If you have experienced something like that, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Those moments of unexpected community, they change everything. And me, I talk to people, I listen to their stories. I promised them that this time, someone was going to listen. Sterling Ashford came to the farmhouse 2 weeks after we arrived. He drove up in a black SUV, flanked by two men in suits who were clearly not lawyers. His smile was as cold and sharp as I remembered. "Miss Mercer," he said, stepping out of the car, "what a charming little homestead you've inherited. Get off my property. I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, my father has made a very generous offer, $200,000 for the farm and everything on it. All you have to do is sign a few papers." "No," his smile flickered. "I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't a negotiation. You have something my family wants, and we're going to get it. The only question is whether you'll be smart about it or whether things will get unpleasant." I stood my ground. Behind me, I could hear the crunch of boots on gravel as more farmers and ranchers gathered around. People who had been working on the house, people who had come to hear about the evidence, people who had their own reasons to want to see the Ashfords fall. "I understand the situation perfectly," I said. "Your family killed my parents. You've stolen land from 200 families, and now you're standing on soil that belongs to me, threatening me." Sterling's jaw tightened. "Your parents died in a car accident. They were murdered, and I have proof." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a document, a single page printed from one of the files in the bunker. A transaction record showing a payment from Ashford Holdings to a man who had been investigated but never charged in connection with half a dozen suspicious deaths. "This is one page," I said. "I have 10,000 more. Names, dates, bank accounts, enough to put your father in prison for the rest of his life, and you right beside him." Sterling's face went pale. He looked at the paper, then at me, then at the crowd of people surrounding us. "You don't know what you're doing," he said quietly. Sterling took a step toward me. One of his men reached inside his jacket. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked. Gil Harlow's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." More sounds, more guns. Farmers and ranchers who had lost everything to the Ashfords, who had waited decades for this moment, stepping forward to stand with us. Sterling looked around, counted the numbers, did the math. For the first time since I had known him, I saw fear in his eyes. I stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear what I said next. "I'm not afraid of you, Sterling. I'm my mother's daughter, and I'm going to finish what she started." He stared at me for a long moment. The fear in his eyes hardened into something else. Hatred, maybe, or desperation. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." He turned, got back in his SUV, and drove away. His men followed, their bravado gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of people who knew they were on the losing side. But we all knew he would try something else. The Ashfords did not give up. They did not know how. That night, we sent the files to the FBI. Theodora had arranged everything through her contacts, encrypted transfers, multiple backups, fail-safes in case anything happened to us. By midnight, thousands of documents were in the hands of federal investigators, along with Theodora's testimony and statements from 24 families who had been victimized by Ashford Holdings. There was nothing left to do but wait. They came at dawn, FBI agents in bulletproof vests, their vehicles churning up the dirt road to the Ashford estate. We watched from the farmhouse porch, surrounded by the community that had gathered around us in the weeks since we arrived. Gil stood beside me, one hand on my shoulder. "Your father would be proud," he said. "I hope so." The arrests were all over the news by noon. Gideon Ashford, taken into custody on charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Sterling Ashford, facing the same charges plus obstruction of justice for his attempts to intimidate witnesses. The empire they had spent 40 years building collapsed in a single morning. But the biggest revelation came 3 days later. Theodora called me at 7 in the morning, her voice shaking with excitement. "Ren, you need to come to my office, now." When I arrived, she was holding a document so old the paper had turned yellow at the edges. It was a will, dated 1987, signed by my grandparents, Margaret and Thomas Mercer. "We found this in Ashford's private safe," Theodora said. "He had it hidden for over 30 years. I read the document twice before the words sank in. My grandparents had never sold the farm to anyone. They had left it directly to my mother, and through her, to any children she might have. The deed that Ashford Holdings claimed to own was a forgery. The sale that supposedly transferred the property was a fraud. The 85 acres had belonged to me and Callum all along." "He stole it," I whispered. "He stole our land before we were even born. And now it's coming back to you. Legally, permanently. No one can ever take it away again." I sat down hard in Theodora's visitor chair. For 14 years, I had believed I owned nothing, that I was nothing, a foster kid with no family, no home, no roots. But my roots had been here all along, waiting for me to find them. The trials took months. Testimony from dozens of families who had lost their land. Expert witnesses explaining the complex web of fraud and forgery. The hard drives from the bunker, each one a nail in the coffin of the Ashford Empire. But in the end, justice prevailed. Gideon Ashford was sentenced to life in prison. Sterling got 40 years. The land they had stolen was returned to its rightful owners. 200 families got their property back. Some of them had moved away, started new lives elsewhere. But many came back. Many wanted to rebuild what had been taken from them. And us? We stayed. The farmhouse did not feel like a stranger's house anymore. It felt like home. Callum enrolled in the local high school for his senior year. I started taking online classes in social work. We learned to cook, badly at first, then better. We learned to fix things, to plant things, to live in a small town where everyone knew our names. Gil Harlow became something like a grandfather to us. Pastor Emmett and Lorraine had us over for dinner every Sunday. Boone taught Callum everything he knew about computers, which turned out to be a lot. And the bunker? It took us 6 months to transform it. We kept the infrastructure, the generators, the water filtration, the warmth that had kept our parents alive during their years of hiding. But we changed everything else. The room with the photographs became a memorial. We added pictures of the families Ashford had hurt, the farms that had been stolen, the community that had risen up to fight back. A reminder that justice was possible, even when it seemed impossible. The storage rooms became bedrooms, simple, clean, each one with a bed, a desk, a window cut into the mountain that looked out on the valley below. 14 beds in all, 14 chances for kids who had nowhere else to go. Callum designed a computer lab in what had been our father's workspace, a place where teenagers could learn to code, to build, to create futures for themselves. Our father would have loved it. And the main room, the one where we had first discovered the wall of photographs, became a common area. Couches and chairs, a kitchen where we taught kids to cook, a fireplace that filled the space with warmth on cold Montana nights. We called it Mercer Haven, not because we wanted our name on anything, but because that was what our parents had built it for. A haven, a safe place, a home for people who had never had one. 1 year later, the first bus arrived on a gray October morning. It was an old school bus painted sky blue with Mercer Haven stenciled on the side in white letters. Inside were 12 teenagers, kids who had just aged out of foster care, kids with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, kids who were standing at the same crossroads Callum and I had stood at 1 year and a lifetime ago. One of them, a girl of maybe 17 with eyes that had seen too much, stepped off the bus and looked around. At the farmhouse with its fresh coat of white paint, at the rebuilt barn, at the fields where we had planted apple trees that would bear fruit in a few years. "Is this place really for us?" she asked. I thought about my parents, about the bunker they had built in secret, filled with evidence of crimes and proof of love, about the choice they had made to protect us, even when it meant losing us. I thought about the community that had gathered around us, the people who had shown us that family was not just about blood. It was about who showed up, who stayed. "Yes," I said, "this place is really for you." I put my arm around her shoulders and led her toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you to your room." That night I stood on the porch and looked out at the stars. In the city, you never saw stars like this. Too much light, too much noise. But here, in this little town at the edge of the mountains, the sky was endless, infinite. A reminder that the world was bigger than your problems, and that somewhere up there, the people you had lost were still watching over you. Callum came out and stood beside me. "Thinking about Mom and Dad?" he asked. "Always." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you think they can see us? See what we've done?" I thought about the wall of photographs in the bunker, all those years of watching, loving, hoping. "Yeah," I said. "I think they can." We stood there together, two kids who had survived the unsurvivable, looking up at a sky full of stars, and for the first time in my life, I knew where I belonged. I walked back inside and picked up the photograph that now sat on the mantelpiece, the one we had found in the bunker, carefully preserved in a silver frame. 4 faces: Mom, Dad, me at 3 years old, Callum, just a baby in our mother's arms, all of us smiling, all of us together. Beside it now sat a new photograph, taken just last week, me and Callum on the porch of the farmhouse, Gil standing behind us with his hands on our shoulders, Theodora and Pastor Emmett and Lorraine gathered around, Boone grinning in the corner, and in front of us the first 12 kids of Mercer Haven, their faces full of something I recognized. Hope. I used to think family was something you were born into, something you had or you did not, something that could be taken away and never given back. But I was wrong. Family is not about blood. It is about who shows up, who stays, who loves you even when it is hard, even when it hurts, even when they have to do it from far away. My parents showed up for me every single day of my life, even when I did not know it, even when I thought I was alone. And now it was my turn to show up for someone else. "Good night, Mom," I whispered to the photograph. "Good night, Dad." I could almost hear them answer. "Good night, baby girl. We are so proud of you. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story. If it touched your heart, I would be grateful if you would subscribe to the channel." We share stories about hope, about second chances, about finding your place in the world even when it seems impossible. I want to ask you one last question. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Have you ever discovered that the people who love you most are not always the ones you are born to? Share your story in the comments. I would love to hear it. And remember, no matter how lost you feel, no matter how alone you think you are, there is always someone who sees you, someone who believes in you. Sometimes you just have to find them. Until next time. The end.